Hello, everyone. Good morning. I am Elisa Grizzi. I am a tech reporter at Politico. We've heard over the past few days that innovation is key to Europe's mission for tech sovereignty and its long-term prosperity. So we've brought two of the people who are actually working on cutting-edge technology to give us their perspective. I think it's a rare treat for Brussels. Thank you for being here. I know your schedules can be very hectic and perhaps even more hectic than policymakers. To my right is Chris Poulin. He's the co-founder and CEO of Narrow IQ. And to his right is Pepin Morris, co-founder and CEO of Prismus. So let's be practical. We're over a year into this mandate, and there's been a lot of talk about simplification. Some has happened, especially as of last night. Have you seen any material changes that help you in your day-to-day work? Pepin, you're nodding, so please go ahead.
Yeah. I think the rhetoric has caught up to the diagnosis. We know that there's an issue, and the rhetoric has caught up. We're 18 months in, as you said, at this point. And now the moment comes for execution. And I think 2027 will be the crucial part to see how will it be executed, what will it actually mean. And so in the day-to-day, currently, we don't see an effect yet, but it's really the execution and the implementation that will count in the end.
Do you have faith that they're going to make the right changes?
Well, I think, for example, the EU Inc. proposal has been very promising. The proposal, I mean, it's definitely in the right shape. It's moving in the right direction. The question is whether or not it will not dilute throughout the regulatory process that it will go through in the next coming months.
What do you think, Chris? Like, has life gotten better for you, or is it about to?
I would also agree. So first of all, hey everyone, great to be here. I think it's pretty much what Pepin just said is there's nothing that has really changed materially in the day-to-day. EU Inc. is great. There have been some changes made to if you want to employ people in Portugal or Finland. That has been made a bit easier. I think my biggest worry is also that like the actual EU proposal is pretty okay. It's great. It's if that goes through Parliament, that would be a help. But if it then comes down to the member states, and there's a big change, and I think also a big history of things really diluting when it comes down to member states giving their go again on things, and they don't want to give away certain thresholds, certain powers that they have, and so we're always advocating for more EU proposals than less, and less German proposals than EU proposals. For example, as this helps us also scale our business across borders.
You're talking about the EU Inc. proposal specifically. So what are the roadblocks that you see ahead?
I think it's mainly that, like, if you take EU Inc. as an example, it's about, okay, so let's say you would found the company under this 28th regime, or you move your company under this 28th regime. What does it actually mean for all of the tax services of your employees? They're still German inhabitants or Portuguese inhabitants. So how does it work in the tax sense? How does it work with, for example, you'd have to be 181 days in the country where you're actually being taxated? How is that actually being done if it's like, a 28th regime? So there's no country that exists in that way. So like, how does that actually work? And so there's still a lot of things that are, I think, unclear. And I mentioned it to you prior in the conversation. I think for startups or generally companies, it's not so much is it more regulated, less regulated, easier or less easier. It's that if things are unclear, this really makes it difficult to plan, makes it difficult to invest. So that's more of the issue.
On this question of planning, right? I mean, just last night we got a deal on the AI omnibus, which delays the rules. How can you plan for that? I mean, during the simplification push, there is also an era of limbo, let's say, where you don't know what's going to happen. So does that actually make your job more difficult?
Yeah, I think definitely when we look at our customers, where we're delivering our intelligence to, we notice that they're, in the end, preparing for two scenarios. And so I think regulation per se is good, but then coming to the implementation, it needs to be predictable, it needs to be clear. And so having that deadline removed and having put a question mark really created a lot of extra effort and extra chaos. Whereas now, of course, the deadline has been set. It's more clear where it's going. So at least now it's a more efficient process to get to a compliant scenario for these clients.
So you were working on 2 parallel tracks for your company with compliance for the 2 dates.
Yeah, we had both scenarios ready, but we were not implementing it yet, just to hold off, because as a startup, of course, time is one of the most valuable assets that we have.
That certainly sounds like a lot of work. But then what are you missing in that time, right? Because as you say, time is a very valuable asset, and there is an opportunity cost to like waiting and not knowing which way you should go.
Yeah, I think it's clarity and somehow knowing exactly when something will be implemented and what it will mean. Again, I don't think complicated regulation is a bad thing. I think complicated regulation actually can bring prosperity on the long term. It just needs to be clear for companies what is expected. What is expected by them, and by which date something needs to be ready.
Chris, what do you think about the exemption for industrial machinery? Do you feel like that's a bit unfair?
Difficult. So I'm not in the business of industrial machinery. So it's difficult to say if that's fair or unfair. I think I would double down on the point that, once this exemption is being done, that means other, service providers are also thinking, like, maybe I have also, an exemption if this only continues for a month longer or 3 months longer, and if I pay my lobbyists more. So I think it just creates another, uncertainty, because once you open a door for a certain thing, that kicks the can a bit down the road. I think in general it is, again, as Pevin just mentioned. If you're a company and you want to implement these things, you also have to make a roadmap. And that part of the roadmap is, okay, you integrate a startup into, helping you do these kind of things. But if you're not quite sure which exact compliance stuff you have to fulfill, which exact data requirements, data privacy requirements you have, then everything slows down. And I think this is rather what the problem is. So I think we would have been better if we would have a rule stack which would have been more strict or less strict, but it would be there 12 months ago, instead of going you through the process for a longer period of time, because then you know what to deal with. And I think it is vastly misunderstood in Brussels that clarity beats the quality of the outcome way stronger in an environment of economic development.
Pepin, I mean, you talk about clarity. Is there also an issue of the actual clarity of the laws? I know you also work on explaining regulation to your clients. How do you? And I also do that for my journalism. How do you tackle that? And do you think it should be more easy to understand? I
think definitely yes. I mean, I have a background as a developer, software developer. So I like rules. I like clarity. I like structure. And if you look at the way that information flows in the early stages of regulation and the regulatory process, it's really chaotic. And I think our startup, what we do is we provide regulatory intelligence. We try to explain to companies and to help them assess regulatory risk. And so we don't really thrive on just chaos of information. We thrive on regulatory change and volume and explaining that in a good way. So I'm all for putting more structure in the information flows, more clarity, and especially as well turning that into APIs and endpoints for software to start using.
Do you factor in the simplification push as also something that is kind of a threat to your business? Because the simpler the rules, then the less you have to explain.
No, not at all. I think it's in the end what we help companies with is to assess which kind of opportunities and risks lie in new regulations. And so if there's a simplification effort that inherently for some companies will drive new opportunities. And so for us, it helps us as well show the value of, hey guys, you need to track the early signals of politics and do that through using our software, basically. Yeah.
And Chris, you work on financial services, which is another beast of regulation, which precedes internet regulation, probably is much bigger than it by a significant margin, I would dare say. Do you think that the regulation in Europe works for you?
I think, to be fair, financial services are not the worst. So if I talk to people that are building in healthcare, for example, like they're really fed up. So there's a refugee coming to Italy, and then he's going from Italy to Austria, and then to Germany and Netherlands, and he has like 4 records of health transcripts, and nobody can share anything with anybody. That's really, really, really bad. I think in financial services it's not that bad, but it's still there's markets that are not properly interconnected, and so it is not only, or I would say that that the regulatory thresholds are still different in the country leads also to the fact that the executives of all these companies don't really know each other. So the interconnection of an ecosystem is just way lower. So if I compare it to the US, for example, it is not so much about is this regulation better or worse, or is it are they doing less or more of what we do, but it's rather that the ecosystem is way more interconnected than it is in Europe, which helps innovation thrive way faster, which helps progress move way quicker, because the bank executive in Chicago and in Boston, they actually know each other, but the bank executives in Amsterdam and Copenhagen didn't ever meet. And so I think this is what's way worse about the general structure. And so I think it's rather about the setting. So if you have one rules of Europe, then a Dutch banking executive could call his colleague in Copenhagen and be like, hey, how are you guys doing it? But if you can only call your colleague in Den Haag, then you rather don't have the same effort.
But then, I mean, these rules are there for a reason, right? And especially the market fragmentation and gold plating, which may seem like an annoying problem to you, but it's also there because of we are a union of sovereign nations. So how should we balance those things out?
Yeah, I think we are I mean, it's getting a bit macro now, but I think we will have to make a decision over the next 5 to 10 years if we see Europe as one or Europe as diverse. And we are very much for Europe as one. I don't think that there's any chance in a multipolar world, which is getting more volatile, more difficult every day, to act as Germany or as Netherlands or as Sweden. And we saw that in regulation time and time again. So I'm kind of always defending the EU a bit when I'm in conversations with local regulators, because I'm like, most of the things that come out of the EU are really not bad, but then they're diluted by the member states, and then what comes out is really, really bad, because it's actually adding another layer on top of the existing regulation layer, instead of adding another layer that takes away an existing layer. That would be, pretty great if we could get one license that, can be passported all around, or one service that, compliance directives, formulas that are all the same from Spain to Greece to Sweden. But if, you have one EU document that you have to file for, and then Sweden and Spain and Greece as well, it just adds another layer of complexity, but it doesn't take the layer away. So I'm all for strict regulation, strong regulation, but it makes it very difficult to have different things in different areas.
Would you consider leaving Europe ever, either of you, to grow your startups?
Well, I think statistically there is a chance. I mean,
it's an evasive answer.
Sorry?
It's a bit of an evasive answer.
I think for me it makes sense to build in Brussels and to stay in Brussels. As a regulatory risk startup, our regulatory hubs in the world are Washington and Brussels, and so playing on those 2 poles is for us a strategic choice. So we're definitely anchored here in Brussels. But then I think if you just look statistically, the amount of startups and specifically unicorns that had to relocate to the US, I don't think because of regulatory reasons, but mostly because of capital market reasons, is a pity in the end, and it's too big.
That brings me to the other sort of part of the puzzle that I think is very important to touch upon, and that's money and capital markets. And there is also a discussion for a capital markets union, which I will not claim to really understand. But what's the biggest problem, like the overregulation or the lack of a united capital market?
I think definitely on the capital markets side of things. I mean, I'm a early stage founder, so I'm not hitting those roadblocks yet. I think pre-seed and seed rounds in Europe, they go quite, I mean, there's money for that, and there's investment in that. But the moment you get to a later stage, I think Chris is getting to that stage. Probably, it's you'll see that the EU funds are getting more cautious if you look at the numbers. Most later stages, so Series B and beyond, are funded by foreign investors and less by EU funds.
Yeah, what do you think, Chris?
I think it's kind of a bit of the same answer again. I'll try to be a bit technical, but not too technical. So let's, for example, say you have an investor who wants to invest in Klarna, for example. Let's say one of the biggest European startups based out of Stockholm, and he wants to invest into the Klarna stock. There's not even one pooled liquidity around European exchanges. So he needs to buy a bit in London, a bit in Paris, a bit in Vienna, a bit in Frankfurt, a bit in Stockholm to actually get his share. While if Klarna is listed in New York, he buys it in New York, and that's it. So like the in-depth of liquidity for European markets is just non-existing. And I think this, then levels down deeper on all of the other things as well. So it's a bummer if you think about all of the strong startups that are out there, like Trade Republic, Scalable Capital in the fintech space, Revolut. There's so many great startups that we've brought in Europe, especially in financial services. And then you look at who's really profiting. It's the Harvard Endowment, Yale Endowment, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, the firefighters of California, and the teachers in Marseille and in Madrid and in Warsaw. They're getting nothing out of it, although they're the company that success is actually built on. And that kind of brings me to that more general topic of, I think we as Europe need to come together as one. We need to be have more clarity on those rules, on how to invest, how to do it. We need to have one broader stock exchange, because we will not be, if you can decide on a 350 million people market or a 60 million people market, it's a pretty obvious choice.
Why are fintech startups from Europe so good?
Because we have to build regulation into our workflows from day one. And I can say out of personal experience, if you have a BaFin license, then people all around the world are really comfortable giving you access to their market, because regulation is pretty strict in Europe. One of the interesting things, for example, so if you are a US fund issuer, you cannot move to Europe. If you're a European fund issuer, you can move to the US, because the SEC rules in the US are so much lower than they are in Europe, while the other way around it obviously works. So theoretically, there's an advantage for companies that build financial services in Europe to then expand. It's one of the reasons why you see a lot of like Facebook or Snapchat who come from the US into Europe. There's not so much in the fintech space. And therefore, I think, especially in that world, we have to, also go on those advantages way more. So I don't think it's a bad thing we have regulation. I don't think it's a bad thing that we pay taxes. I don't think it's a bad thing that we have data privacy. I think it's good that we have less homeless people. I think it's good that we have less people imprisoned, or people are healthier, or people are getting older than the US. I mean, there's so many advantages that we have in Europe theoretically, and we're shooting ourselves in the leg all the time with doing some kind of version of a contractual review that then takes 3 years, and in the end it's diluted so much that nobody has a clue of what to do at all, instead of doing one thing, doing it clear, and then take it further.
On investment, let's say we have the Capital Markets Union with deep liquidity and so on. What about the cultural part, right? Like, isn't there, are Europeans not just more averse to risk? And is that something that you see in your conversations with investors?
I think it's getting better. So I think it's true. I think it's a cultural topic that Americans are more risk or more open to risk. I mean, it's always a risk return thing, right? It's not always a risk thing, and so they're more open to it. But I think on the other hand, it's also the way we as Europeans approach this in general. So if you take an example like Trade Republic. There's so many people that told them, well, you have 10 euro stock trading, you cannot do it for 1 euro because you will not find enough clients that do it for 1 euro. But guess what? If you open it up for 1 euro, then you find more clients. So I have also the feelings that Americans tend to see that more for the long run and in the broader thing, and so I think it's also on our generation of founders to kind of change that in a way, the perception, and I think what makes me pretty optimistic is that the interconnection between European founders is pretty strong. So I think the next generation is not caring so much about it's Brussels or Amsterdam or Paris or Zurich, but it's Europe.
That's, I think, also the EU proposal shows that, right? Like it was a large cohort of founders across Europe that galvanized around that. I think that's all we have time for. Unfortunately, I wish I could speak to you a lot more. Thank you so much for being here. And we have a coffee break now until 11:20 a.m. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about data and big tech and how we can use data as an enabler for innovation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for it.
Thanks.
We are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies. Discussion is all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?